The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to rugby again, people. The coat has come out of the car and I've got it on because now it's going to start and rain for the rest of the day. I need to be done these villages by 1 o'clock or else I might get drenched. So I'm going to try and hot foot it through this one and the other two that you will see this week. I can't go too fast through this one though, because this one has got a lot to talk about. This, believe it or not, is only a small village, but it used to command a huge area that ran to 10,000 acres. It took in so many other little villages and hamlets in that area. It's not as big these days though. It's still very important. This is MONKS Kirby. MONKS Kirby, church farm belonging to the monks of St Nicholas of Anjou. Okay people, we've seen a couple of really small ones so far this week, but today you can forget the little. This is MONKS Kirby, which used to be one of the most important places in the country at one time, and its legacy still remains today, despite the fact it's now far smaller. MONKS Kirby lay at the very centre of Roman Britain, where the Fossway and Watling Street meet. We know that point as High Cross, but hang on, we've already covered that, haven't we? Yes, we have, because these days High Cross isn't within MONKS Kirby's boundaries. However, it used to be, and so did a whole host of other villages and hamlets and two massive country estates, namely Newbold Revel, which we know from previous adventures in rugby is now no longer in MONKS Kirby, and Newnham Paddox, which still is. The main street here runs from a large church, the only remaining part of a priory founded in 1077, to the park gates of Newnham Paddox. For 500 years, Newnham Paddox was the seat of the Fielding family, or the Earls of Denbigh. They lend their name to one of the two pubs here. The rest of the village radiates from a green in 4 different directions. What otherwise remains now is a much scaled down version of the ancient parish, and the village of MONKS Kirby is relatively small, but it's still dominated by that church. Let's see what else it has. Come with me for a walk. Right, so here's what MONKS Kirby Parish looked like in 1900, but both this and the modern boundaries are nowhere near as big as they used to be. The historic boundaries of MONKS Kirby, which existed since medieval times to the 19th century, included several neighbouring villages. Places like Copston Magna, Paleton, Stretton-under-Foss, Brockhurst, Little Walton, Street Ashton and Easenhall were all within MONKS Kirby. It even included High Cross, the point where the Fossway meets Watling Street. The parish even had an exclave at Ulsthorpe in Leicestershire. All of this meant MONKS Kirby was the largest parish in Warwickshire and the second largest in the entire country. The historic size of MONKS Kirby was around 10,000 acres, that's some 15 square miles. In 1866, Paleton, Easenhall, Stretton-under-Foss and Copston Magna all broke away. So what we have now is a much reduced version. MONKS Kirby now has an area of 4,500 acres, which still places it in the top 11% of English parishes by area. It no longer includes the country estate of Newbold Revel, but Newnham Paddox is still part of it. So too is the hamlet of Street Ashton, pretty much the only satellite settlement that's remained as a hanger-on. So the next question is, what did this place have at the turn of the 20th century, once all of those other villages had decided to fly solo? Let's zoom in and have a look. MONKS Kirby looks practically the same as this today, albeit with a few minor alterations. A lot of these buildings are still standing, but a few have a different use. Note before we look at them, there are a few names marked on this map, describing different areas of the village. To the north is Bond End, to the east is Brockhurst, and then the southern section is labelled as Monks Kirby. These were all considered separate hamlets, but now they've all merged together to form one much bigger village. The centre of civilization has now moved considerably further east. In Monks Kirby itself, your eyes are drawn immediately to the church. That's a Priory church, and it's the only remaining part of what used to be a huge group of religious buildings. It was a group so big that it's believed the old Bell Inn, shown here, stands on one of the Priory's former structures. Immediately north of that is a Baptist chapel, as you can see here, but that's no longer there. You can also see the other pub, the Denbigh Arms. That's named after the Earls of Denbigh, who lived at Newnham Paddox, and if you cast your eyes across the map to the east, you can see part of its parkland. Between the two, in Brockhurst, there was a Roman Catholic convent. That's still there because Monks Kirby still retains a huge Catholic community. There's even a Catholic burial ground to the north. Finally, there are 3 schools marked on this map. These days, Monks Kirby only has the one school, and in this episode we'll learn how it came into existence. So, how does all of this compare to the Monks Kirby we're about to walk through? Let's have a look. This map clearly shows how the hamlets have now merged with each other, forming one continuous village. It now radiates from a green in 4 different directions, but even so, the main bits are still clustered along the road between the church and the gates of Newnham Paddox. The route we'll take around this is going to be pretty simple, despite the topography here. After a drive through Street Ashton, we'll start at the old Bell Inn and work our way to the Priory Church via the Denbigh Arms. We'll spend quite a bit of time on those before heading east. It's really then just a case of following the main street through what used to be Brockhurst up to the gates of Newnham Paddox. We'll pause there and discuss the history of that before completing the route by using these lanes. They form a circle back into Bond End. Really easy, right? Let's do it. Let's get going with the hamlet of Street Ashton. This is literally the only hamlet Monks Kirby still retains control of these days. Other villages and hamlets like Paleton, Stretton-under-Foss and Easenhall have all gone their own separate ways. The prefix street is a direct reference to the fact that we're close to the Foss Way. We are less than a mile from that Roman road. The hamlet is made up of a few scattered dwellings, and it's not really anything like a village. That said, some of them are worth a mention. The principal buildings in the hamlet are Street Ashton Farm, which was historically part of the estate of the Earls of Denbigh, and 2 large residences called Street Ashton House and Ashton Lodge. The latter of those is now a hotel. Street Ashton House, on the other hand, is an imposing white building that sits on a hill above the rest of the hamlet and can be seen for several miles around. It was formerly a dower house for the Earls of Denbigh and the residence of Major Walter Basil Louis Bonne. That name might be familiar to you. When we covered the parish of Stretton-under-Foss, we spoke at length about Newbold Revel. Bonne, who was decorated in World War I, was the son of the man who owned the Newbold Revel estate. For more about him, the Stretton-under-Foss episode is your friend. It's linked in today's end screen. In the 1950s and 60s, the house was owned by Spencer Wilkes, chairman of the Rover Car Company and a co-founder of the Land Rover. By 2007, the house was owned by the Mater Ecclesiae Convent, based in Monks Kirby. When the convent closed in 2020, the house was sold privately. Let's drive on into Monks Kirby. The population of the village today is only slightly higher than that recorded in the Domesday Book, but that's far lower than the population it had before the turn of the 19th century. Things have changed here demographically since the 1950s too. Since that time, the primarily agricultural population of the village has been replaced by a wealthy, well-educated, older demographic through the process of extended suburbanisation. Many of the incoming people originated from towns and cities like Birmingham and Coventry. Apart from the Denbigh Arms, this change in the village makeup hasn't given rise to any new businesses. Monks Kirby has no shops or any other commercial enterprises. Mind you, they do make good use of the village hall, the Revel School, and the 2 churches. Right, so we've made it into Monks Kirby Village. Now behind me here you can see we've got something water related. Severn Trent Water, is this? Yes, Severn Trent Water, some kind of water pumping station or the like, a small building. Now this is at the end of Bell Lane, and Bell Lane is the first street we're going to tackle here in Monks Kirby. The first thing to talk about is that building right there. This is what used to be the Bell Inn. It's no longer a pub because in 2016 it closed and became this private house. There's not a great deal of information available for this pub, but perhaps the thing that's most interesting about this would be its name. It's a reference to Monks Kirby Priory. When the Priory was in full flow, before the days of King Henry VIII and his big ideas, there was a bell tower here. It stood at the Priory's outer gate, and travellers would ring the bell when they arrived, signalling they required a night's lodging. In later times, the Bell Inn was important for the local Baptist community. You'll recall on the old map a Baptist chapel was marked immediately north of the bell. There is no sign of that building today, and the area it occupied is now a lying wasteland. Its history is not at all recorded. Bell Lane takes its name from the old pub. If you follow it to the end, you run into Main Street. Where the roads meet each other is the site of an old post office. These days it's all modern housing. The 1900 map showed just one building on this corner. These days, there's a few more. Literally every piece of land we've walked on so far used to be part of the Priory. It was a massive establishment. In 1380, records tell us the Priory had two mills. One was a windmill and the other was worked by a horse. The windmill was probably on Miller's Lane, near what is now the vicarage. In addition, there were fish ponds, lots of them, and they were pretty bloody big. None of them exist as ponds now, but this piece of history still lives on thanks to the Fish Pond Community Park. This is built where the ponds would once have been. Nice little village green here in the centre of things. Triangular. We often see triangular greens, don't we? And they're quite common here in Warwickshire. Monks Kirby has one of these. Now, opposite this green, you can find a pub, and it's called the Denbigh Arms. There it is. I promise you that is how Denbigh is pronounced. It's a Welsh name. It's not Denbigh, it's Denbigh. Even the Denbigh Arms has a connection to the Priory. This is in front of the old fish ponds, and it was originally called the Cock Inn. Now, unlike other pubs with that name, there was nothing poultry related here. Instead, the name was probably a corruption of the Latin word coccina. That meant kitchen or guest house, which any decent monastery worth its salt would always have available for pilgrims and other travellers. And now, the bell tower makes sense. Travellers would ring the bell at the tower and then be escorted the short distance we've walked to this. Isn't it great when history comes to life like that? The Denbigh Arms, by way of its very name, also records another period of Monks Kirby's history. For 500 years, the Earls of Denbigh lived at Newnham Paddox, and the modern moniker for this inn reflects their presence. The Denbigh Arms is otherwise a well-known old rustic bar and restaurant. Being located next to the church, it's become a great little tourist attraction in its own right. I've no idea what the Priory building would have looked like, but the Denbigh Arms, as you see it here, opened in 1769. The building offers a function room on the first floor, which is perfect to hold events, parties, or a reunion. There are two open fires downstairs, as well as a games room. All of its food is homemade, with ingredients sourced from local butchers, bakers, and farmers. So up to now we've seen and talked about a few bits and bobs that were Priory related. Visually though, none of them have had anything to physically see. We've just seen what's there today instead. The church though is a different story. This is the only part of the Priory that remains. As the village name Monks Kirby implies, this used to be a monastery, but of course Henry VIII saw to its demise. The parish church of St Mary and St Edith is what remains, although if you're hyper-local, you may call this St Editha's, like they do at the one in Tamworth a bit further north. The church stands on the summit of a small mound. It consists of a chancel, a nave, north and south aisles, side chapels, a south porch with a parvis, a vestry and a tower built into its southwestern corner. In short, if this church ain't got it, it's not worth talking about. What you see here is a rebuilding. The first church on the site of St Editha's is said to have been founded in 917 AD by Ethelfreda, the daughter of Alfred the Great. Nobody can corroborate that though, it's a theory rather than a concrete fact. 160 years later, we get one of those. The Priory Church was founded in 1077 when Geoffrey de la Guerche, a Breton knight, rebuilt whatever was here at the time and gave it as a priory to the Benedictine Abbey of St Nicholas in Anjou in France. He named it in honour of the Virgin Mary and St Denis. This church has been rebuilt twice since the days of Geoffrey de la Guerche, firstly in 1380 and then again towards the end of the 15th century. In 1415, between the rebuildings, Henry V transferred the priory to the Carthusians of the Isle of Axholme in Lincolnshire. One other notable change from that sort of time period is the dedication. The 100 Years' War with France saw the St Nicholas title be dropped in favour of St Edith of Polesworth, a Warwickshire saint. This is why the current church has the St Edith or Editha dedication. The arrangement of the church is somewhat unusual. The nave, for example, until recent times extended into the chancel without an arch or any other line of demarcation. Although the church is lofty, there's no clerestory. Instead, the windows are placed at a great height above the floor. The rest of the priory was to the north of the chancel. Part of it was embodied in the church during the 15th century reconstruction to form a chapel. Apart from some blocked openings, a door jamb and the line of a steep roof on the chancel's north wall, nothing remains of the priory buildings today. When the tower was rebuilt in the 15th century, it included a tall octagonal spire, but that was blown down on Christmas night in 1722. And no visit to Monks Kirby's Priory Church can be had without a mention of the bells. There are 8 of them, the oldest of which dates back to 1390. The interior was restored in Victorian times. The baptistry windows are by Hardman. As you can imagine, all of this, either Victorian or ancient, makes St Editha's Church worthy of its Grade 1 listed status. This is the largest parish church in Warwickshire, measuring 110 feet by 50. Now in this corner of the church here, there's something on the wall which I want to point out. It's a tapestry or some kind of needlework, and it says Brockhurst Middle School, Learning Together, September 1992. Now Brockhurst Middle School no longer exists, but there are still some school related things here in Monks Kirby, and that is related to what we're about to see on the main street. So let's head out of the church and go and find them. Next we come to the village hall. This used to be a school, and it's the oldest of the 3 schools that you will find on Main Street. There may well have been a school in the village when the Priory monks were around, but as far as education goes for sure, we can only go back to 1625. Whatever school was here at the time became an endowed grammar school thanks to Thomas Wale, a wealthy citizen of London. Wale was a packman travelling between Leicester and Coventry, and his bequest was made in gratitude for hospitality he received at Monks Kirby, Stretton and Brinklow. Therefore, Wales's charity was founded and it funded the grammar school until 1912. It was then amalgamated with another school at Brockhurst to form a mixed Church of England affair. The old grammar school, somewhat enlarged these days, is now this village hall. Next we head up towards Brockhurst. When Monks Kirby and Brockhurst were separate hamlets, they were divided by the line of a small stream. The stream still exists and it's called the Smite Brook. Let's hop over the cute little bridge at Smite Close as we make for the War Memorial. The War Memorial is not just for Monks Kirby, this is also for Stretton-under-Foz, the parish which contains the Newbold Revel estate. In total there are 22 names on this one. 13 men from Monks Kirby and 4 from Stretton died in World War I. The other 5 died in World War II. Next up we have the Revel School, and this today is the only school in Monks Kirby. Just before the old Monks Kirby Grammar School ceased to be a thing in 1912, there were 3 schools in this village. The grammar school was one, there was a Catholic school, and the other one stood here. The Catholic School of St Joseph's was founded in 1873 by the Sisters of Charity, whom the 8th Earl of Denbigh had invited to Newnham Paddox for that purpose. He gave them a chapel, a school, and a few other buildings besides. The school that stood here was Brockhurst C of E. It was a picturesque old building that was alternatively known as Lady Mary's School. That's because the 8th Earl's twin sister, Lady Mary Fielding, was the patron of Brockhurst C of E. It was demolished in 1912 to make way for this, a new building created to serve the amalgamated Brockhurst C of E and Monks Kirby grammar schools. Nowadays, this also caters for the Catholics. Officially, the school's name is the Revel C of E Aided Primary School with Catholic provision. It's had that name since 1999. As the school has grown, it's developed satellite sites in 2 neighbouring villages, whilst also modernising these original school buildings. Today, years 1 to 6 are based in Monks Kirby, the reception class is at Brinklow, and there's a nursery at Harborough Magna. Now, if you continue on past the school, you're heading towards the gate of Newnham Paddox, which will get its own big section in a moment. But before we reach that estate, we have to talk about the building you can see behind me here. Now, Monks Kirby has a very, very strong Catholic community, as we learned there at the school. And what you're seeing there is a Catholic church. So now we know a little bit about the Catholics, let's fill in the rest. This is St Joseph's Catholic Church right next door to the Revel School. It was built in the 1990s to a design by the architect John Holmes. It was consecrated by the Archbishop of Birmingham, Bernard Longley, in July 2012. St Joseph's continues to be a worshipping community today with a large congregation. Highlights during the year include an annual May procession, which ends with the crowning of a statue and benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. There's also a Corpus Christi procession in June. Monks Kirby has been a local centre for the Roman Catholic faith since the conversion of Rudolph, the 8th Earl of Denbigh, to Catholicism in 1850. It was thanks to him that St Joseph's Convent, a girls' school and orphanage, were established in the village in the 1870s. That's all well and good, but St Joseph's Church is a modern building, so that leaves us with a question to answer. What happened to the 19th century convent buildings? Well, you don't need to go far to find out. Literally next door is a house called the Old Convent. The first nuns to occupy this were the Sisters of Charity, who came from another convent on the Earl's other estate at Pantassath in Flintshire in North Wales. The Sisters of Charity were succeeded by the Sisters of Mercy in 1923, and they stayed here until 1977. In 1982, this building was then occupied by the First Congregation of Mary, Mother of the Church, or Mater Ecclesiae. In 1998, they moved to Street Ashton House, and when that was sold in 2020, it officially brought an end to a 150-year-long tradition of renewed monastic life in Monks Kirby. As an aside here, by the way, during World War II, the 10th Earl of Denbigh handed over Newnham Paddox House to another community of nuns, the Canonesses of the Holy Sepulchre. They had evacuated their convent in Chelmsford in 1940. While they were here, they ran a school for local children. Speaking of Newnham Paddox, we've now made our way to the edge of its parkland. Now, there are a couple of footpaths that run across this parkland, but this really needs its own pictorial section. To understand Newnham Paddox properly, we have to go back to the days of the Priory once again. At the Reformation, King Henry VIII confiscated the assets of Monks Kirby Priory and granted the manor to the Bishop of Ipswich. The manor then changed hands several times over the following 80 years until the powerful Buckingham family passed it to the Fieldings, the Earls of Denbigh. The Fieldings had been the lords of neighbouring Newnham Paddox since the 15th century. The Newnham Paddox estate is ancient, probably dating from the post-Roman period when new settlements were established. That fact in itself explains the name Newnham. It means new village. A very large manor house existed on the estate until 1952, and it had at least 3 stages of development. There was a large timber-framed house here in the late 16th century. In the late 1600s, grand formal gardens were added, with a series of pools known as the Great Canal. Between 1754 and 1768, Lancelot Capability Brown arrived on the scene. He built a large mansion house for the 5th and 6th Earls, perhaps incorporating elements of the earlier house. At the same time, Brown removed the gardens and replaced them with his own distinctive landscaping. Fast forward to the late 19th century when the house was substantially redeveloped in a French style. The remodelling included an ornate Roman Catholic chapel by the architect Thomas Henry Wyatt, which tallies with what we already know about the Catholics here. However, the house that stood here in those days is no more. It was demolished in 1952 after receiving water damage resulting from the thawing of frozen pipes. It couldn't have come at a worse time because the family was struggling with death duties when it happened. So there may be no historic Newnham Paddox house these days, just Brown's remaining parkland and the old grand gates and stables. However, there is still a dwelling in the park. In 1982, a wooden framed house was erected, but by 2023 it had fallen into disrepair. It was replaced by a new 7-bay house designed to echo the classical style of the one that Capability Brown built. It might not be anything as grand as the now lost building, but at least Newnham Paddox can still claim to be an active residence and not just a parkland. Ironically, the parkland is what attracts most people to Newnham Paddox today. Every April, the grounds of the house are opened for a popular springtime event known as Daffodil Sunday. It sees thousands of daffodils come into flower across the grounds, and it's a thing of beauty. The Fieldings first came into possession of Newnham Paddox in 1433 by marriage. Before that date, their chief associations were with Lutterworth, where they lived and were buried. Adjoining parts of Leicestershire and Northamptonshire are where their older properties were situated. As a family, they were pretty handy when it came to war. They produced several good soldiers. Generation after generation of Fieldings were knighted for their war services. Much interest is still attached to their extraordinary claim that they were descendants of the Habsburgs from Germany. Because that can't be proven, rather humorously, some historical commentators like to refer to the Fieldings as the Perhapsburgs. Whatever the truth of the matter, they were also really good at acquiring land, and in Monks Kirby, they certainly did that. They enlarged the estate by purchasing land from the Carthusians of the Isle of Axholme, who, as you'll recall, were in possession of all that had belonged to the former Benedictine Priory, right up to the suppression by Henry VIII in 1538. The first Fieldings known to be buried in Monks Kirby are Sir William and his son Basil. Their handsome tombs, with recumbent effigies of themselves and their wives, are to be found in the north chapel of the chancel at St Editor's Church. Later Fieldings are buried in its vault. The Civil War brought family conflict. The first Earl of Denbigh was loyal to King Charles, but his eldest son Basil favoured Parliament, and so father and son fought on opposite sides at the Battle of Edgehill. The Earl died in 1643 of wounds received in a skirmish at Birmingham. His wife was Susan Denbigh, the Lady of Honour to Henrietta Maria, King Charles's queen. Basil, her rebellious son, became the second Earl. After the king's execution, he returned cautiously to a royalist allegiance. At the Restoration, he was reconciled to Charles II with no loss of title or property. Ambitious and widely travelled, he was personally acquainted with the nobility of Central Europe. The historian Horace Round suggests that it was he who first publicised the family's claim to be descended from the Habsburgs. True or not, it certainly inspired the Fieldings of the 18th century. The novelist Henry Fielding, author of Tom Jones, was a member of the family. He was reputedly the first member of the family who knew how to spell. Successive Denbigh served at court and were close to the royal family. The 8th Lord Denbigh died in 1892 and was buried beside his first wife Louisa Pennant in the church they had built at Pantasaf in North Wales. His son Rudolph, the 9th Earl, was a successful soldier and man of affairs, serving often as Lord-in-Waiting to Queen Victoria. His sister, Lady Winifred, married the singer Gervase Elwys, whilst his younger brother Basil drowned in an accident at Rheinfelden. 2 of his 3 sons were killed in World War I, during which time, by the way, Newnham Paddox served as a military hospital. Of course, it's no longer here now. Now, all we have left to do is complete the circuit of Monks Kirby by using the lanes to the north of the main street and the gates of Newnham Paddox. By doing so, you pass this Roman Catholic burial site, which was originally a private graveyard for the Fielding family. It's now instead used for burials from St Joseph's. In the middle of the cemetery here is a mortuary chapel, known alternatively as the Chapel of the Sacred Heart. It was designed by the architect Thomas Henry Wyatt as part of the remodelling of Newnham Paddox House in 1888, undertaken for the 8th Earl. Dead opposite the burial ground there's a field, but even this has a past. On the old maps we saw at the beginning of this episode, this field was marked as a sandpit. Sand was quarried in various areas around Monks Kirby, but this seems to have been the main one. Part way around these lanes you cross over the Smite Brook again. There used to be a ford at this northern end of the village where it crossed the road, but these days there's a bridge. In fact, there's two. There's a road bridge and this little footbridge, which I opted to go for instead. Okay, we have pretty much made it all the way around Monks Kirby. Bell Lane is on my left hand side right here, and that will take us down to where we started. Beautiful village is Monks Kirby, and a lot of history attached to it. Now, as we learned in this episode, there were plenty of other villages and hamlets which formed part of the ancient Monks Kirby parish. Now tomorrow we're going to be heading towards a village that used to be within Monks Kirby, but these days it's its own thing. I'm not going to lie to you, I knew that one was going to be a hard one to put together simply because of the sheer amount of information and history that's crammed into one little village. Appearances can be deceptive. Monks Kirby was a hugely important parish. It's back to the smaller ones tomorrow as we take on a village that used to be within the boundaries of the 10,000 acres that Monks Kirby once covered. Join me there for another church and a quarry named after High Cross. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.